Thank you, Mind Empowered, for inviting me for this topic and discussion. Uh, what
Sir,
I
sorry to
planning to
interrupt, but can't see you. Your video is off.
just a minute, just
Yeah.
audible, enough.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Today it's not making so much formal kind of discussion, but it's a kind of informal discussion. So anybody who have a doubt while I'm talking, you can raise your hand and ask the question. So it will be a interactive two-way uh, discussions. So the anxiety part, um, definitely this is what you have to know is anxiety is a normal thing. That means a little bit of anxiety is always needed for a higher and better performance. But whenever there is a stressful life, and again we can divide the stress into two parts. That is, one is eustress, another one is distress. So depending on the level of stress, not only the level of stress but the coping skill of that particular person, the anxiety part or the stress part may be, for some person it may be a good thing to improve his performance, and from other persons it will be very difficult, and coping will be very difficult depending on his coping skill. So in this question, they are asking about career and studies. So in both way, the first thing what we have to say, what whoever having this anxiety is, you have to think of, is it a normal anxiety level or is it out of proportional to your uh, stress level. That means, for example, a person who is appearing for a board examination in SSLC, that adolescent child, definitely we are all very anxious to have a university or final year examination. So if that anxiety is out of proportional to the stress level, then definitely we have to think of something abnormal and you need help. In that situation, how you assess is it is a normal anxiety or an abnormal anxiety? The assessment should be on the psychological symptoms and signs as well as the physical symptoms and signs. For example, if the patient is having so much of anxiety and physical symptoms like heartbeat is fast and he is sweating a lot, he has tremors and all, then that means he can't control that particular stress and he is become overwhelmingly stressed out or anxious for it. In that way, uh, first we have to acknowledge that there is an anxiety, and you can give some name that I am anxious or I have this problem, I am difficult to handle this. If you are not recognizing it properly and if you are not giving up, naming means you are recognizing it, acknowledging that problem. So that will be the first step in dealing an anxiety situation. No doubt in this discussion of career and studies, one head is better than two or three heads that you can discuss with your seniors. You can discuss with your career guidance people like that. And step by step it should go. And even if the person know that there is no need to anxious at all, but he may get anxiety, in that situation you may need a relaxation training to cope the situation. And in a very severe form of anxiety, that means generalized anxiety disorder or phobia kind of thing, sometimes you may need anti-anxiety medication for a short period of time to handle that situation, and you can go back and repeat. Another thing is, these things may repeat again and again throughout your life. So you should have an idea that in all situation is going to come in the near future, and you have to prepare that anxiety situation to cope. What I'm trying to explain is, just because just 1 day or 2 days before the examination or something like that, you can't do anything on that short period. So you have to prepare that, and you get help so early, at least 2 to 3 months early before the examination or some interview or something like that. Then you will handle that situation fairly well. And in one or two situations you are handling properly, then you will get your own idea of tips, coping skill, and you will be more confident in the next stressful situation. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. If you fail in once, you may get anxiety in all the situation. If you have some success in one situation, you may get confidence in the other upcoming events.
Thank you, sir. Next question. I want to achieve so much in life. I'm currently an MBA student and hoping to start my own business someday. Sometimes I get like a surge of energy, but most days I feel so down. Mostly I live inside my bed and don't get out. I want to change that. I want to work out, be healthy, but I can't seem to. Sometimes I feel like crying for no reason. I know I have mild depression, but can't really pinpoint why. Because if I have to say all the negative stuff that I endure, the list won't stop. Please kindly let me know the basics to get out of depression.
Um, it's a very common situation we see in clinics. This kind of currently in the final year of MBBS or the beginning of the career. Again, diagnosing the specific condition is very important. I'm in this question. I was planning to discuss about two psychiatric illnesses. One is depression. Another one is bipolar affective disorder. So while explaining the symptoms and signs of these two illnesses, anybody who is attending this session may feel that I have all these symptoms. So I am giving a warning: don't self-diagnose, because whatever symptoms I am going to explain in psychiatry will be seen in normal people also. Unlike in physical condition, if you, for example, you have a COVID and you have this much fever, we have an objective thing to prove that you are COVID positive and you have fever of 100 degrees Celsius, 100-degree Fahrenheit. But in a psychiatry, there is no such objective signs and symptoms. It is basically a set of symptoms explaining in a syndrome, and that symptoms, if it is making dysfunctional to that particular patient, then it is an illness. But if it is that symptom is seen in everybody. For example, I am depressed always. I have a low mood. We all have low moods some part of your life, and every day, some days, some minutes, something like that. So I'm just explaining what is depression and what is bipolar affective disorder. Depression, by definition, it should be 4 or 5 major symptoms will be there, and 4 or 5 minor symptoms will be there. Out of the major and minor symptoms, depending on the number of symptoms present and absent, it is divided into mild, moderate, severe depression. Okay. So the most common or most prominent symptom is low mood. So but for that low mood itself, you have to get some idea that it is not just low mood that I am not happy like that. But it should be like this, that it should be pervasive. That means that low mood and mood fluctuation should be present throughout the day for 2-3 days or continuously for 2 weeks. So if it is more than 2 weeks only, we will name that diagnosis as depression. So other symptoms will be less energy, easy fatiguability that you are explaining in this, that I can't get out of the bed. I feel so tired, and I am procrastinating the things tomorrow and day after tomorrow, like that. So that easy fatigability is one of the thing, and always a pessimistic view about future, that I will not get any positive thing in my life. That kind of things. So, if that is continuing for 2 weeks, then we can diagnose a major depressive disorder, and we can think of starting counseling, that is cognitive behavioral therapy or medication. Bipolar affective disorder is a person having a mood episodes, that may be a depression or a hypomania or a mania episode. Hypomania means, a mania means the just opposite of the depression, that he is very energetic, very highly euphoric, and he has so many ideas to this. He have a feeling or a delusion that he have enough money, lacks of money, and he will invest and he will become a Ambani or a Adani, that kind of feeling. And basically he lives in cloud nine. So that mood will be in a very euphoric, higher kind of thing, and the same person having a depressive episode. If a person having 1 or 2 episode of mania, depression, or a hypomania, we name it as bipolar affective disorder. So in this case, uh, we can't diagnose bipolar affective disorder or depression because all the symptoms mentioned may be the just normal part of his life because of he is doing his final year of MBA and he planning to start a business. So in the first question, I explained that there is anxiety, which is normal and abnormal. So depending on the severity and coping skill of that particular person, we will diagnose. So what I am talking about is abnormal things that is happening. That is depression, bipolar affective disorder, and anxiety. But if you feel that these kind of symptoms are pervasive and continuously happening to that person for more than 2 weeks, definitely you need a professional help. In this condition, the immediate thing what you have to do is it pervasive and is this is happening for a long time and he is trying personally very trying all his efforts, but he is not getting out of depression. So, treatment part, one is the proper diagnosis of depression, bipolar affective disorder, or any other comorbid illness. Another thing is we have to choose what type of medicines or what type of treatment you need. It's all, not always medicine. So, if it is a mild depression and just a life event anxiety, that means the early career life or starting business and all, we usually our first line of treatment should be counseling. So in the counseling, mainly the techniques what we are using is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a very elaborate topic. Cognitive behavioral therapy itself is a 3-year course. So I'm just giving the basics. That means this is cognitive behavioral therapy for depression is worked out by a scientist called Dr. called Beck. You if you Google it, you will get Beck's Triad, Beck's Depression Institute, Beck CBT Institute, and it's a big multi-millionaire business actually. But it's good because it works and there are so many evidence that it works. So in the basically cognitive behavioral therapy explains that our cognition means our attitude about our life, attitude about our future, attitude about ourselves is depending upon the behaviors as well. It's not just thought process. So we can change that person in two ways, by changing his cognition, by changing his behavior. So and he explained that there are so many cognitive errors in the sense, for example, everything is seen as a very big way. That means even a small kind of low mood or small kind of setback in life is taken as a big failure. I am always like this. I can't do anything. I am a big failure. Everybody is happy, but I am not at all happy. So that kind of overgeneralization and magnification kind of cognitive errors will be there. So CBT, the first part of CBT is we evaluate all the persons about this type of cognitive errors, and we will try to restructure the cognitive errors by giving alternative way of thinking together with behavioral intervention. Behavioral intervention means relaxation training, exercise, activity scheduling, those kind of things. So combining CBT plus, if needed, if it is a moderate to severe depression, definitely we need medication to come out of depression.
Thank you, sir. Next one. What are the possible side effects of taking antidepressants?
Antidepressants, basically we divide into 3 groups. It's not 3, there are many. If we say that before 25 years we have only one antidepressant, that is tricyclic antidepressants. We will give that antidepressant for any illness, including schizophrenia, BPAD, depression, like that, because we don't have much choice. We have only 1 or 2 medicines. But luckily after 2000, I mean in this new century after 2000 millennium, we have at least hundreds of antidepressants, we can say that. So our armamentarium is increasing day by day. So basically, the earlier antidepressants comes in the group of tricyclic antidepressants. We say TCA. Then comes the SSRI. SSRI means selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Then SNRI, NARI, so many things. It's all medical terms, so I'm not using it. So the earlier group of TCA have much more side effect. The most common side effects patients reporting with the tricyclic antidepressants are dry mouth, or anywhere there is a mucosa there will be dryness, for example in your eyes, in your nose, in your mouth, even you have a constipation because of dryness of rectal area. So that is the most common side effects they are reporting. Another thing is sedation. That means you may feel very dizzy or sleepy at daytime. Another side effect is sometimes weight gain. So these are the most common side effects we reported. But tricyclic antidepressants, we are not using it nowadays because of these side effects. Then comes the other later part of antidepressants that have side effects, have this weight gain and dry mouth. All those things are very less, but some level of mild. The happy news is if you are taking the uh, medicines properly, that means regularly in a fixed dose, these all side effects will develop a tolerance phenomenon. What is tolerance means? If you are taking a particular dose of medicine for a long time, our body will readjust in such a way that that effect will not be there. For example, the sedation will be there in the initial few weeks, maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And after taking the medicine for a long time, that sedation part will go off and you will not get sedation. And another thing, again, for this dry mouth and all, tolerance will develop. But unless unnecessary fear of having organ damage, that people will have a feeling that this medicine will damage brain, damage kidney, damage liver, damage heart and all. It's very very unlikely because most of our medicine that we are writing during, that is common drugs, escitalopram, venlafaxine, those kind of newer generation antidepressants have no organ damage effect. That is, that medicine molecule is made in such a way that we can use it for life, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And one more thing, antidepressants is a group of things is giving for anxiety, depression, those illness. But antipsychotics is a very separate kind of group of medicine what we use in psychosis. That means schizophrenia, kind of a much more severe form of psychiatric illness. So all people will have a feeling that uh, they have seen patients taking this medicine and they are very obese and they are very ooze, dizzy and all. So they have a feeling that all the psychiatry medicines have the same side effect. It's not like that. So antipsychotics group of medicine will have a set of completely different side effect, and antidepressant is different. So don't generalize, because people who are depressed and come to us and they refuses medicine and saying that this will make me more sedate and weight gain, it's actually they are talking about antipsychotics. It's not antidepressants. So antidepressants are much more safer now. They have a newer molecules coming up in market, and very very rarely some people will have sexual side effects. That is also, I said, it will develop tolerance and it will go off after some time. And some people having anxiety have sexual dysfunction as well, because they may have premature ejaculation and all. So in that condition, antidepressant is actually helping that patient to have a good sexual function. So that side effect is actually helping that patient having a much more good sexual life.
Thank you, sir. Next question. I'm usually a calm person who doesn't get angry at all. But then I fight with my mom and she's so vulgar, irrational, and we fight. She hits me with belt. She screams at me. She calls me names. She says disgusting to me.
Screen
2
is
years
not,
ago, I found
screen is not changed.
not changed. I changed it. Should I change it again?
No.
No, not come. Just a second. Is this? Can you see it now, sir?
Same only.
No. Okay, I'll stop sharing and start sharing again. 1 second. I'll start sharing again. 1 second. Can you see it now, sir?
No. Yeah.
No?
Yeah, it's coming.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Completely?
Yeah.
Okay. A few years ago, I found out that screaming back at her shuts her up a little bit. And ever since then, whenever I fight with her, I start screaming too. I stopped caring, even it is just during the time when we fight. What comes out of my mouth, and I hate the person I am during that time. I don't want to do it. I don't enjoy doing it. I just want my mom to stop being unfair and mean to me. I'm the worst person during that time, and I'm scared for the person, future me, that I'm going to become. Because what if this becomes my character? What if something that I started because of self preservation ruins my personality and me?
Again, a big topic. Parenting and how our childhood experiences modifying our personality and characters in the future. Two things, all the research have found that childhood experience and traumas have a long lasting effect on anybody's personality. So it's very true that where we are growing up and what is the parenting style of our parents definitely decide on our future personality. So two things are here. One is anchor control. Another thing is what are the parenting styles, which is researched out, and what is the good thing. There are so many schools of thoughts in parenting, but the commonly accepted parenting style we usually divide into four. That is authoritarian parenting style, authoritative, pessimistic, and non-indulgent. It's very complicated if I am explaining everything, but the gist of that division is one is we can find out something to improve, not just something to find out and blame somebody. That means blaming your father or blaming your mother for their act. But if you are dividing and evaluating under these headings, we have a platform to work on and how to improve. So that is the basic idea of knowing what are the parenting styles. So this authoritarian and authoritative style, it's all culturally dependent. So we can't impose that it should be authoritative always and it should be authoritarian always and pessimistic always. So it should be a mixture of what we can do properly to make up the child's character good. So the four division is basically based on the hierarchical system. So we Indians, especially our family setup and cultural setup, is very much different from other parts of the world. That we all knew that, and we have a very hierarchical kind of family setup itself. That means there should be a family head, and he will order, and others will obey. That kind of guru chala relationship. But most of the time, or sometimes, it may not help in everybody's family. For some family, it is good. For some of them, it may not be. That is called authoritative kind of thing. That means there is a hierarchy, and there is a big person, and there is a small person, and all the small person should obey the big person. Whatever wrong thing what he is doing, we all should obey, and nobody is above, or nobody is attempting to question him or her. An authoritative parenting kind style of is, it's a kind of, there is no big and small. That means we are all equal, all have a responsibility of making good in the family, and we are not obeying, but there is always a kind of discussion, negotiation, positive feedback, negative feedback. That kind of system is there, because in an hierarchical system there is no feedback, because what above thing is saying that we should obey, that kind of thing. Then other thing is there is no hierarchy, but always the emotions makes the decisions. That means for a small child, if he is doing some tantrum, so to calm down that tantrum, takes some decision because he is rolling down and crying for a chocolate. So calm him down, give a chocolate. So that is another kind of parenting. In some family, because of many other causes like substance use, alcohol, or psychiatric illness, or a very busy working parents, no one is scared or no one is bothered at all about parenting, and there is no connection at all. We are all connected by Facebook, but we are not connected in family like that. So it's everybody's decision that son make one decision, daughter make another decision, father will not come to family at all, he is always in factory, and mother is busy with cooking, cleaning, those things. So completely indulged, no, not connected at all, so nobody is caring. So in everybody's family, these four types of parenting style will be intermixed and mixed up. So there is no pure authoritative parenting style, something like that. So, as I explained, the division of this parenting style is just to know where to work on and also so many things. So, uh, in small kids and adolescents, actually, they learn everything through modeling. Modeling means not just the language that instructions we are giving. For example, I will give you a good example that father will always say that don't use mobile more than 1 hour, but you should be focusing on studies. That's a very common statement that we are all giving to our children. At the same time, he is not raising his eyes from the Facebook. That means he is giving an instruction looking at the mobile phone. So instead of instructions, children will model. That means they will get the cue from what we are doing, or non-verbal language. And another thing is this kind of insecure feeling in the family. That means if the mother and father is angry at children, they are not reciprocally angry at parents, but their children will get the feeling that I am insecure, that nobody is there to protect me. If there is a problem arise, or if there is a threat from outside our family, nobody is there to protect me. So that insecurity itself is a major many issues for example, low self-esteem, or sometimes while parents are angry, they may do some statements which is very detrimental for their self-esteem or confidence level, so that will carry on for a long period. And again, I am saying that this modeling part, if the mother or father is angry at children, means they will get an idea that if they are angry, they can yell, they can shout, they can do something physically aggressive thing, which is normal because it is shown by the parents. So in this example, this screaming, all those things, violent, irrational, and fight, all those things will be modeled, and that will be imbibed in her character, and it will go, and even we will give genetically inheriting to the next generation as well. So uh, these four parenting style, identifying the style, and we can modify it. That is one thing what we can do from this question. Mm, I don't know. I explained it properly, or I make it more confused. I don't know.
No, sir. No, I get it. So the person should try. So I think because it's because of the way his or her mother deals with. So they're scared that they'll become the image of her, just the same way what she is. They'll become that in future. But there is nothing to be scared of. Is what you said. If we choose what the parenting style is, so it's not necessary we become the mirror images of our parents. I don't think so, right? That's what you wanted to say, right, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can work towards becoming a better person. I think so. So I hope the person who asked this question got that answer. Next question. My self-esteem and confidence is quite low sometimes. How do I increase it?
This both self-esteem and confidence level. Uh, improves or develops when we are even a small child uh, level itself. So again, depending on the this thing, that means um our behavior will develop in a in two ways. That is, we have a feedback system in our brain. That means positive feedback system as well as negative feedback. So some persons, because of not their fault, they may get inherently some negative comments always. For example, a person who is very anxious, a child, or very um not having much communication skill. So, not because of his or her fault, he may get a feedback that I am bad, I am not enough, or I am not good enough. Those kind of feedbacks from the from all level, parents, teachers, peer, and all those things. Another self body image issues that we all talk about body shaming these days. I think those things. So depending on the again that feedback is not because of his or her fault, because body image is a cultural social construct. It's not his or her construct, because even if whatever good image or celebrity or a beautiful thing, it depends on the person who is seeing and who is commenting on it. So he can make a very beautiful person into a very ugly and dirty person as well, because that means that is his comment make the body image. That part we have to understand that it's not that it's not that so important in everybody's life. Again, this confidence level is also depends on the positive feedbacks what we are getting. So how do I increase it is two things. One is the cognitive behavioral therapy techniques that I explained earlier. That means there is a cognitive error sometimes happening in our mind because of our experience or a childhood experience or our workplace experience, something like that. So analyze it, we restructure the cognitive errors, and we will give another positive outlook. Just not explaining that to the client, but we are giving practical tips that how to improve and how to do this, or in a particular body shaming situation, what all the things you should do. So that assertive skill training itself is part of building self-esteem and confidence. So it's so many things are there. It's not like a blanket therapy kind of thing. That means one size fits all for all. But depending on everybody's things, we will give practical tips. Again, I explained in the last question that if you get two or three positive feedbacks, then that itself is a boost to improve self-esteem and confidence level. And from that experience, you may get practical tips again, and you will work on it, and you will get more and more positive feedback, and it's a gradual process. And one or two setbacks may again topple all these things down. So we have to expect that it's not permanent. It's a dynamic kind of thing. It's changing every day, and we have to be mindful and careful on that particular topic. I mean, particular thing. It may go down normal. We have to pick it up and go further up like that. So it's not confidence as well as self-esteem is not a static thing. It's a very dynamic thing. Depends on the situation and feedback.
Yes. Thank you, sir. I have pretty good self-esteem, but I still struggle with my confidence because I fear judgment. My mind goes blank if I am disappointed.
Again, body image issue and self-esteem issue. I explained that it's not his or her fault, but the person who is judging, he may give a his judgment on his experience. So we should not give much importance to that. My mind goes blank if I am in the spotlight means two things. One is normal social anxiety kind of thing. That means if in front of three or four persons, he may feel very anxious. So again, that social anxiety symptom is making dysfunctional to that particular person. We have to think of diagnosing a social anxiety disorder and behavioral therapy accordingly. Um, for a social anxiety symptom, the treatment is exposure. That means if he has one or two anxiety provoking situations in a social situation in front of some people, stage fear, and those things, the treatment is exposure. Exposure means you enumerate all the anxiety provoking situations and get exposed much more and more to that particular level and do it again and again. After some time this anxiety will come down, because anxiety graph is like this. It will go up and up, and again stay for some time, and definitely it will come down. If the person is not experiencing that anxiety and not exposed to that social situation, that graph will not come down at all. It will go up again and again. So by experiencing the anxiety provoking situation and doing it again and again, definitely anxiety symptoms and their severity will come down. And because man getting that positive experience will reduce the anxiety in the next social anxiety provoking situation. So it is a kind of exposure making him more and more, sorry, less and less anxious. So exposure is the crux here. Most of the time people will avoid the situations and they will withdraw, and they may be comfortable in their comfort zone, but that enjoying that comfort zone is making more sick actually. So it should be exposure and reducing the anxiety.
Thank you, sir. I know I would never try suicide, but I have thought about it multiple times when I was angry, sad, or just without no reason. I don't want these thoughts. How do I stop them?
Very important question. Today morning and only I read a report from NEGM, New England Journal of Medicine. It says that more than 10 percentage of increase in suicide in last 1 year. That means during the pandemic year. We all know that we are expecting a mental pandemic in the coming days because of lockdown, business loss, financial loss, family members loss. There are so many people died of COVID and all. That is one side. And even before pandemic, suicide is the major killer in the age group of 14 years to 44 years. That means you may not be believe me that if you rank the cause of death in youth from 14 to 29 years, suicide have ranked number one. So that is the severity. It's not a road traffic accident, or it's not war, it's not flood, it's not pandemic, but it is suicide. So it's a very important question and very relevant from and so India is definitely not a suicide capital, but our suicide rates are increasing day by day. And the place where I am talking in Kerala, we have a much higher suicide rate compared to other states. But Kerala have a rank 6 now. Uh, Many other states have much more higher suicide, but on an average, 20 people die per lakh population because of suicide. And the saddest part is young people who are very active, very productive, and very creative people die more. That is the saddest part. So, and all our research say that suicide prevention is not very difficult. There are so many points and preventive measures what we can take. And in all the studies, it is replicated that most of the patients who are doing completing suicide, uh, around 86 to 90 percentage of them having depression. They were on treatment, or they may not diagnosed at all, and they may not get proper treatment, and they got suicide. So suicide prevention basically means treatment of depression in a very early manner, properly diagnosing it and giving the proper treatment. As I mentioned, depression symptoms and signs. So pick it up early and treatment start at an early stage. Don't wait for the person to attempt a suicide and come to casualty and then psychiatric consultation and treatment. It's not that way, because many of the people who attempted suicide may not come to the hospital at all. No, they may die in community. So in suicide prevention, there are so many myths about suicide. That common myths are, those who are talking about suicide may not get suicide or may not complete suicide. Those who attempted once may not complete suicide. Those kind of myths are there. These are all myths. It's not fact. Most of the people who die of suicide may did attempt 4 to 5 times earlier in their life. So suicide attempt, those who attempted, there is a more chance of dying by suicide. Another thing is, those who talk about suicide will not do it. That is also another myth. So people kind of when people who are interested in this, everybody have their own role, because it's not just a psychiatrist or a doctor or a hospital. They can't do anything by preventing suicide. I'll give you an example. For example, if you have got heart attack, you will come to hospital. You'll have severe chest pain. You will come to hospital. As the doctor will see you, cardiologist will see you. We will do the ECG, echo, all the things, angioplasty, bypass, and all. And we doctors will get at least 8 hours to 24 hours to save a man. But if a person is thinking of suicide and planning to complete suicide, it is just 3 seconds. So in that 3 seconds, nobody can save that person. So our idea should be preventing it and going to that way. So first thing is diagnosing depression. Another thing is, there are some cues that they are talking about. They may feel that sadness is overwhelming. They have a pessimistic view, and all these things will be talked out and talk with somebody before doing the suicide. So our idea is, if somebody is talking about, even for a kind of silly joke kind of talk, it should be taken very serious, and we will stay with the person for a long time. We will say that if he is having suicidal thoughts, stay with that person for next 24 hours at least, or till the suicidal thoughts are going on. And another thing is, we have some network of protection. So our action plan should come from the family itself, because in the family, if they are somebody is talking about suicide, from 14-year-old child to a 100-year-old man. And another myth is, these elderly people will not think of suicide because they have only few years left to live, so they may not think of suicide. It's not true, because any age group is vulnerable. So those who are talking about suicide in the family, we have to be doubly careful. And another thing is, some we will say parasuicidal threatening behaviors. For example, those who threatens their spouse or parents to get some benefit, that I will get suicide and I will slash my wrist and showing that I am going to die, something like that. Even if that behavior, that shows that that person is in distress now. So even if it is a threatening behavior, we have to take it seriously, because that shows that that lady or a boy don't have another kind of coping skill to solve that crisis. So threatening behavior also should be taken seriously, and he may get help if he's taking some impulsive reducing medicines are there, or suicide antidepressants are there. Some personality traits are there, that those who are prone for suicide and death. For example, borderline personality disorder. Those people have a personality traits, and they have always live in a very miserable condition, that they have a feeling of rejection always. So even just an SMS that I am not coming to you because you were angry yesterday, that SMS itself will show, have a feeling that my boyfriend rejected me, that I am my life is useless and I am going to die. So that kind of personality trait peoples are there. Those people need actually more care and more protection. But um, those personality traits are so annoying in so many areas, so many situations. So that person may die of suicide. Another chance of suicide is substance use. That means alcohol, cannabis, those new party drugs. These are all drugs which have a direct effect on brain, which makes the person to think of suicide and making life miserable. So any substance use person saying about suicide or ending life, even under intoxication, you should take it serious. Then only we can prevent that person, because most of the time person who are drunk and talking about something, we all just push him away or carelessly push him away. So those who are in our family, those who are addicted to all this, especially alcohol and all, even during intoxication, if he is talking about suicide and death wishes, we have to doubly careful, and we have to protect him, and he need treatment.
Sir, so this person says, I don't want these thoughts. How do I stop them? So, what should this person do? Because this person is having suicidal tendencies.
Yeah, in that situation, the first thing he can do is he talk with somebody, because he can't keep everything with himself. Talking with somebody, or there are suicidal distress call numbers we have in Kerala, India, everywhere. In all metro cities, there they are very active, but in a rural area, it may not be there. But we most of the mental health hospitals have a distress call number, or just going to a casualty or emergency department anywhere. We have a psychiatrist in most of our hospitals. So the first thing you should do is, this thought will not go away simply. We can't push it out, because thought process in involuntary process. We can't voluntarily stop it. First step is talking with somebody, uh, and uh, uh, and the person who are hearing is also very important, because he should at least listen. That the best tool in preventing suicide is active listening. Active listening is a skill that we have to we should all acquire. So somebody is hearing means at least we can delay the suicide attempt for 1 or 2 days. Then that golden hour is over, and we can make him see the therapist. We can start medicine. We can admit him. So in psychiatry hospital, we admit for two reasons. One is harm to self, another is harm to others. That means if a suicidal tendency is there, we will admit. If the person is so violent that he may harm the others, we will admit. So in those situations, we have to admit the person. For example, this person is getting repeated thought, but I don't want to die. That may be because of some illnesses, like one is psychiatric illness, another common, even physical illness have suicidal thoughts. For example, some hormonal imbalance, thyroid dysfunction, even in elderly people having stroke, mild stroke affecting parietal area, that means part of a particular brain area. They will not have any weakness of motor function, like weakness of one side or something, that that person will have only suicidal thought, because that area is affected because of stroke. So that is possible, so we need to investigate. And
So,
repeated thoughts coming, definitely that is a warning sign to get help from a professional.
professional. So, he or she should go and see a psychiatrist at the earliest, right? Thank you.
True, true.
Thank you. I have commitment issues. How can I resolve them?
For example, because commitment issues means,
I think what this person means, commitment issues, maybe when they're going out like dating or whatever. So if they have a girlfriend or what I think, okay, just looking at the question, I feel it must be that when the person says for marriage, then they cannot commit. Maybe something related to that. They don't want to commit. Commitment issues usually are related to marriage, like you're dating and your
yeah,
girlfriend
yeah.
asks for marriage. So I think it's that maybe, or it could also be something related to projects, like to give a particular date for finishing the project or something. Maybe.
Okay, like it's actually a normal situation, because in our life there is definitely a life event of having an illness, sorry, having a relationship, dating, all the breakup, all those things.
Yes.
In my clinical experience, it's not the first or second commitment makes problem. It is actually the breakup time. Definitely, we know that it's much more stressful. And two things I'm giving an example. From my clinical experience, what I'm saying is two things making the crisis worse is we substitute or what we can say, for example, having a relationship for a long time, 5 to 6 years, that didn't work out, and one person is going out or walking away from that particular relationship, and breakup happens. So one person is a victim in that situation, okay, because he or she don't want to break up that relationship, but somehow happened. So immediately what happens is, especially in the young adults and in the adolescent age group, they substitute someone else in that particular stage. That may be his or her close friend, or those who know about all these relationships, and he will substitute. So in that decision making, what happens is this substitution happens. For example, that person said no to this relationship because and such reasons, because um, or in that relationship that particular person don't have some one or two skills. That skill is that skill is present in that another person. So what I'm trying to explain is, if a breakup happens for some reasons, one or two reasons, if that two reasons is solved by the another person, we definitely start another relationship with that person. So in numerically, what we can say, we are expecting hundreds of good skills from that particular person, and that breakup person have 100 good things, but he don't have only two proper positive skills. Another person, he may after this breakup, he or she made a second relationship, have these two skills which is absent in the first person, have these two skill properly, but he don't have that 98 good another 98 skills. So he or she is actually substituting a 98 good skill with just a two skill. So it's a kind of substitution and compromise. There is a better chance of breakup of this relationship as well, because he exchanged that 98 skill with just two skill, because that two skill is absent in the first person, that nine. So in the initial phase of beginning the second relationship, he or she will be very happy with that extra two skill, but that 98 is absent now. So it may not last long. And that out of that 98 skill, for another skill will be there in the another person, he may compromise or go for the third relationship and break up with the second relationship. Just in numerical value, what I'm saying. Then how can I resolve the means? Again, I didn't understand the context.
So I think so because this person has commitment issues, so maybe forming relationships might be issues with them. So how can he approach it so that he can have a steady relationship?
Again, depends on many factors, his or her personality traits, their ideas about life and relationship. So many things are there.
Okay, I think they'll have to be more specific because I myself cannot understand how context. So we'll go to the next. That's okay. I like everything about me except the stretch mark I have on my leg. I'm constantly trying to cover it up. I had gap too, and now I have braces on. But because I lived all my 2 years with braces on, I used to be really self-conscious to talk. Because I always felt like people were looking at my tooth and think I am ugly. People kept telling me the only problem with you is that you have gap tooth. Otherwise, you look good. I always struggled with getting these type of comments, and it affected my
वन
personality and confidence.
ये बहुत
This again, body
हाँ कोई नहीं
shaming
करना
and
चाहूँगा
all,
कौन सा
confidence, self-esteem, all
तो
these
खुला
things are
रहे इसको
coming up. I will talk about an abnormal condition, then I will come to this question. Abnormal condition is body dysmorphic disorder. It's an illness, psychiatric illness. Body dysmorphic disorder means uh, there is no problem with the body at all. Here there is a gap in the tooth, but there is no in what the illness what I am talking about. There is no problem with the body at all. But that person, that patient have a delusion that his body is dysmorphic. For example, he have a very crooked nose and bigger than the face. That kind of delusion. It's not true. It's not factually. It's not true. But that person have a thought that his nose is not looking good, and some person will have a feeling that their jawbone is bigger than their upper maxilla, so they have a protruded jaw, some dysmorphism in the face. But factually she is very beautiful or he is very beautiful, but they have a delusion. Some people will have a delusion of having a bigger shoulder, inappropriately bigger breast. They have a and that kind of dysmorphism. It is purely delusion. Those persons, delusion means false fixed belief, which is a non-challengeable belief. So we can't challenge he or her that your nose is good, but you are talking about is nonsense. We can't challenge that way because delusion will not go away like that. We will take the picture and show that you are so good compared to Karishma Kapoor. Your nose is better. We can't challenge in any way, so that is a delusion. So body dysmorphic disorder people usually go to plastic surgeons, other physicians. Usually, they will not come to psychiatrist, because if somebody is saying that you have a psychiatric illness, that your belief is wrong, the moment they will become so violent, and those who are saying that sentence will get beaten. So even if a psychiatrist is saying that you have body dysmorphic disorder, she will definitely do something to it. So that is an illness. Just I am saying that there is an illness called body dysmorphic disorder. Very difficult to treat because it is a delusion. They will not come to hospital. Even somebody is explaining in such a way that you should take help, that person will get beaten. Usually their parents or their peers. So, in this condition, what things what we can do for improve the self-esteem is, one is acknowledging that those who are hearing or talking about this, acknowledge and empathize with that particular person that yes, you have a gaping of teeth. We should acknowledge it. Simply saying that it's not that important in your life. You are a CEO. What is there in a gaping tooth? You have 4 lakhs of salary every month, and you have a very beautiful wife. Explaining that way to that particular person is actually making him more hurt. So the first step is acknowledging that there is a issue and empathize with him. And we can talk with him or negotiate in such a way that in that situation, what all things we can do positively. That means the other body comfort areas or other positive things about his or her body image, we can talk about it more. And if it is a small child or an adolescent or a young adult, usually an acknowledgement from the opposite sex. For example, a daughter having this issue, and the father is acknowledging it and helping her out, it will be much more comfortable and self-boosting rather than mother is talking about it. And ulta in son also, because they will get a feeling that they should, because body image and especially in adolescent age group, they always uh, connect it with other sex, all those things. And another, in an adult having this body image issue, the main thing we have to do is avoid sexualizing that image or dysmorphia. Because, for example, uh, there are so many cultural things that we explain about beauty, all those things now, slim, obese, those. In every culture, there are so many this thing which are gender specific. So that means ladies should be like this, gents should be like this, those things. So if a body image issue, if we are sexualizing it, it will be more emotionally hurting. So avoid that sexualizing part. And the third part is building resilience. That means, yes, I told you that acknowledge that those things in the initial time itself. Don't, because it will not just go off. What we always do is forget it, what is there, that kind of minimalizing the thing. If it is so small and so trivial, she will not or he will not talk about it now. Because if he is talking about means it is very important to him.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That was very knowledgeable. Can you suggest me a good ADHD specialist and how much will the average cost of the diagnosis?
ADHD specialist, there is no specialist like that. ADHD can usually the best person to treat an ADHD is definitely a psychiatrist because uh, ADHD is a developmental disorder. It will stay for lifetime and it will not go off, and it is not treatable or it is not curable because ADHD is a special kind of brain having attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. So it will stay for his lifetime. We can't cure it, but there is definitely need treatment, and it's very important to treat at a very early age, at the age of 5 or 6. For a ADHD specialist, any pediatrician or any child neurologist or even a psychiatrist can do that. And the major part of the treatment part is done by a psychologist actually, because three types of treatment, not three types, three part of three treatments is divided into three. One is parental management training, another is medication, third one is preventing the complications of ADHD. So parental management training is very important because ADHD people will be very very bad in their home rather than anywhere else. So parents will be treating them so badly without understanding the ADHD part. They will get beaten. They will get more punishment compared to the other kids. So sibling rivalry will be there. And at the age of 16, if the ADHD patient is coming to me, if I ask what is your problem, the first answer will be like this: "Give me a gun. I want to kill my mother." So that kind of difficulty in managing the child in the home. Diagnosis part and average cost is for me it's just a session to diagnose it. No need of for multiple sessions, because if you're talking with the parent and getting history, that's enough, and we can observe the child and we can see the hyperactivity part there. If it is so mild, and ADHD is three types, that is attention deficit type predominantly, hyperactivity type predominantly, and impulsive type. And hyperactivity and impulsive type, you can see it. The person who is entering here or the child is entering our clinic, he will make a big hangama, so we can diagnose from the sight itself. But person who having only attention deficit, it will be very difficult. So we have to get history from teacher, school, parents, uh, in a very detailed manner.
So, sir,
Average.
sorry to interrupt, sir. Actually, so over here, obviously, it is a college student. So, obviously, this person has figured out that this person has got attention deficit. So, what should be the way forward? Like now
Correct.
that he or she knows.
Correct. So I told that ADHD will stay life for a lifetime.
Yes.
So what happens is after 14 years or our later adolescence period, this hyperactivity part will go off without any treatment. But this attention deficit part will be there, and the impulsive nature of an ADHD kid will be there. These two will be very detrimental for an later adolescent child, because attention deficit and impulsive part is very dangerous, because those who are riding a bike or those who are riding a vehicle, this attention deficit will make more accidents. And impulsive nature means that means he need a very speeding kind of those things will be there. So the more dangerous part is road traffic accidents, and also in academic decline, that because of attention deficit he can't score much mark. And even who are attending an interview, they will ask three questions. This ADHD child may get only one part of the question, so he may leave the other two unanswered without knowing that they asked that question. So that severe attention deficit will happen in exams as well as interview or anywhere where constant sustained attention is needed.
So, is there any kind of medication, sir, or any kind of activity?
Definitely. That's what in adult ADHD, just counseling or behavioral intervention may not help. They need definitely medicines. Two types of medicines are there: stimulants and non-stimulants. Stimulant medication, you can wonder why this already hyperactive kid need more stimulation. It's not like that. It is basically the inhibition of the frontal lobe, and non-stimulation of frontal lobe makes him more hyperactive. So we are actually stimulating the frontal lobe part to make him more calm. So methylphenidate medicine we can think of. The problem with methylphenidate is it's a scheduled drug. That means scheduled X drug. We can't get it directly from a pharmacist. A psychiatrist should prescribe it, and somebody should supervise it also, because they may use for recreational purpose and it is not good. So proper supervision and medication is very important.
Thank you, sir. Next question. I sleep late and hence I have really bad dark circles. And because of classes, I don't get to sleep in either. I'm always tired. I don't eat my food on the correct time. I'm always in my bed. I feel like my brain doesn't function properly these days. I want to start working out and dance.
Very abnormal thing happened 1 year back. Now it is normal. Because in lockdown these things are happening everywhere, and we all are victims of that. It's a new normal, we can say. But definitely two things here very important. One is sleep hygiene. Another thing is a timetable for the daily routine. Sleep hygiene, there are three parts. Sleep is an involuntary activity that we can't control our sleep. We can't initiate our control. We can't control over the initiation of the sleep. That means we can decide when to go to bed, but we can't decide when to sleep, because it's an involuntary thing. But there is one voluntary thing which is always under our control. That is the time to wake up. So sleep hygiene means fixing a time to wake up. If you fix it on 7 a.m., for God's grace, it will not change at all for rest of your life. That is the best thing in the sleep hygiene. If you wake up at 7 o'clock every day, the rest of the things will get scheduled in such a way. So that is the thing of best thing in doing a sleep hygiene. Another is, if there is no habit of sleeping a day or taking nap, don't do it anytime, including week. Because if you sleep or take a nap on Sunday, then again the sleep structure will get damaged, and it will make you more sleepless night in the next part of your week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so on. And another thing is this working out and dance and all, it definitely give you a good sleep, but it should be in a timely, regular manner. Once upon a time doing it, definitely not going to get any sleep. And if I wake up at 7 a.m., that eat food at correct time, all those things will get corrected.
Okay, thank you. All toxic relationships my friends have made me afraid to fall in love.
This is the bad thing happening in our media nowadays, because toxic masculinity, and definitely in our part of Kerala also there are few incidents happened of acid vitriolage, burning the lover for refusing his proposal, so many things. Uh, what I can say is this is happening for millions of years, and it will happen again. But some hype by the media may be the reason for afraid. And definitely another thing is love relationship. Everything is a natural instinct. It will not go off just because of this media hype. It's a biological, physiological thing happen to all in our life, and it will come and go in cycles.
Sure. My mom is bipolar, kinda. I'm not sure. I don't want to anger her. I love her so much. I know she loves me too. But we always end up making the other miserable. It's affecting our mental health badly. I had suggested us both to get some therapy together, but Amma refused because she asked me, now you want to make me out to be a mental case too? Ignoring the fact that I asked to do it together with me. I wish I could get her to agree to therapy because I know it will help. And my mom really needs it because she's been through some of the worst experience and she had to support herself and her kids all alone. Lots of hardship. I want to make her happy. I want my mom to be happy, but my mom isn't allowing herself.
My mom is bipolar is a common statement. The first thing you should do is evaluate her. Even she is not coming, you can discuss with a psychiatrist and do the evaluation, and do a proper diagnostic evaluation and diagnose it first if she has or she is not having a bipolar affective disorder. Explained in the first question what is bipolar affective disorder. If we are diagnosed it properly, then no need to negotiate with her, because if she has an illness, she may not voluntarily come for a therapy. In that situation, if we will evaluate her insight. That means if she has some idea about the mental disorder she is having, and if she has insight into the symptoms, then only this negotiation will fruitful. So in some cases, we may forcefully admit her, and she need medication at least for 3 weeks. Then we can start the therapy. I'm talking about bipolar affective disorder. But some mood fluctuations and all may be there in the other kind of mental disorders as well. For example, borderline personality disorder, brief episodic mood disorders, or even just depression will have a bipolar kind of nature, because elderly people after 45 years post menopause, this depression will not be seen as a depression, because she will not cry or she will not say that I am depressed, I am sad. He may be very angry. That angry mood itself may be part of her depression. So, detailed evaluation and diagnosing it properly is good. And some people having an illness and they don't have an insight, then negotiating with them will not be fruitful. So, they need forceful admission and evaluation and treatment. Most of the cases, especially severe bipolar affective disorder and schizophrenia, psychosis kind of thing, they will not agree at all. They usually give this statement that you are making me mental and you are admitting me at a mental hospital and labeling me as a bipolar. So that kind of thing we have to do forcefully, and we will admit. Admission is for two things. One is initiating the treatment and medication. Another thing is to rule out, and we have to say that you don't have any illness and you go home. So that also can be done by an admission only, inpatient care. So in this case, she may need an admission and start treatment, because
I
most of our psychiatry hospital, we have a psychologist, psychiatric social worker, and psychiatrist. All three are there. So we all three will evaluate and say that you don't have any illness, or you have illness and you need treatment.
I overthink about what people think about me.
This is again depending on the confidence level, self-esteem, social anxiety, the experience, childhood experience, the feedbacks she got or he got from the peer group, teachers, and all. And most of the people try to make happy, try to make other people happy rather than make
themselves.
themselves. So that is also another cognitive error that we can correct through counseling and the brief cognitive behavioral therapy that we this just a single statement need proper evaluation in such a way that even the body dysmorphic disorder have another component called halitosis. That means not related to this question. I'm just giving a condition that they have a feeling that they have a very bad smell, bad odor, so they will not go out. So they always think about others' perception of himself or herself, and those kind of illness may be part of this. But normally this is very normal that our think about what people think about me is a usual thing. In this condition what we will do is there any cognitive error in that particular person, or is it just a normal thought process? So she may help by a counseling and correcting the cognitive error.
How to deal with exam stress? My final year exams is approaching January 22nd to February 2nd. How to stop overthinking and start studying? I don't use any social media, so I'm not distracted that time. I have a target to achieve in this exam to do my higher studies. And I think that is bothering self doubt me somehow. Please give me some help on this. Thank you.
Exam stress. There are so many ways, but again, that one tip may not help everyone. So the common tips I used to give for SLC college students is 3R techniques. 3R means just I forgot it. Read, review, and sorry, I forgot it. It's basically we will prioritize the topics. For example, if you take a big textbook, we just survey it off. Simply turning the page in so fast, we will see all the pages. So we'll get a picture that these are all the topics in these exams. These are the topics in this textbook, and just surveying the heading, and not reading from one page to another or the whole test. We are just reading the headings only. Then we will take the all the question papers, that what are the questions repeatedly asking, and that question we will try to get the answer from that textbook only, not reading everything, just reading the question and answering, and make note of it. And after completing that, we will get another 10 or 15 pages of notes, just revising that notes only just before the examination, so that will sharpen your memory. This is very important in a very big exams, like for example medical exams. For me, MBBS exam going for tomorrow, we will have at least 20 textbooks with 10 kg weight. So if we are reading from one page to another, it will take another 2-3 years. So we will not read everything for exams, so we will read the notes what we made in the classes only, so that will revise it and exam. And another exam stress reliever is relaxation training at the early part of your this thing. For example, if you have exam stress in the SLC exam, plus two exam, you have very stressful exams. Then in the degree exam, you need to prepare your mind and body at least 3 months before the exam. So one part is relaxation training. Another is virtual exam. We have to mindfully see the exam, the exam hall and all, just visualizing it, and we will feel that even if you think of the invigilator coming to us, you will get a goosebumps or palpitation or gastric irritation kind of thing. That is the panic symptoms what we are expecting in the exam hall. So if you have that, you can relax it before the exam, entering the examination hall itself. So this question is dealing with three parts actually. Preparing for the exam. I'm not talking about the topic preparation, but your
Yes.
psychological preparation, relaxation training, before exam, before entering the hall, after entering the hall, and after examination. Because examination will be always 2 or 3 exams. No? So if first examination is over, that may be the triggering for the panic attack for the next two. So what you should do and what you should not do after examination is crux here. Should not do is after immediately after examination you don't open the question paper again after completing all the 4 exams. Seeing that question paper immediately after coming out of examination hall, and you are comparing your mark with your colleagues, or you answer a question and somebody comment on it that it was wrong, that will make more anxious for the next 2 exams. So immediately after examination, you close it off, keep it in your bag itself, don't open it. After completing all the 4 exams, you do the some discussions.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very insightful, sir. Last question. How can I recover from both mental and physical abuse from my mom?
Very general question. Depends on the context because we are not going away from mom. No? Uh, need evaluation of parenting style, any psychiatric or mental comorbidity in that mom or the child. Because if the son and daughter is accusing that mother is physically abusing, again need evaluation. In this condition, we usually do a uh, circular questioning kind of evaluation. Circular questioning means we'll keep mother, child, father, or whoever there in the family. We'll ask them to come to clinic. We will ask non-judgmental circular questions. That means we will ask the daughter what happened on April 10th. Where were you? What was the reason that your mother was abusing you? And she will explain her part. And I definitely ask the mother, where were you? What was your experience? So like that, it is just explaining everything in front of them only. As a facilitator, as a therapist, I am just asking few questions. So I will be an active listener, non-judgmental, and I will not do anything. They will talk. They will talk hundreds of things. Definitely, it need at least 1 to 2 hours. So make time for it and make them talk. That talk itself may resolve everything, and they will go happily. If it is a small, short-lasting kind of thing, if it is a chronic thing and happening for many years, definitely need a proper family therapy itself. In this condition, I recommend a family therapist. Family therapy sessions are doing by psychiatrist as well as psychologist. Only thing is, this person, that the expert who are doing a family therapy should have some formal training in that because it's not just common sense. What happens usually in a family therapy session is they will take like hundreds of lectures on out of their experience. In my family, I am like this. In my cousin's family, they do like this. It is not family therapy. It is just a moral science class. It will not help. So this circular kind of questioning, and what we are doing is guided discovery and facilitating the insight. That means we just listening to them and asking some few questions. They themselves are revealing their problem in front of themselves, and they will get corrected by their own uh, coping mechanism. So what we are doing is empowering each and everyone to uh, help them correct it. Because in a family issue, if somebody is giving a uh, pakka guidance kind of thing, that guidance will last for only that crisis only. Immediately the next crisis will come and it will not work unless the problem solving skills come from themselves. They should acquire that skill.
So, thank you, sir. Thank you so much.